Now, we have quite a complicated situation now. One of the difficulties of when you have meetings with parallel sessions and with satellite meetings is you're always frustrated by not going to go to another session. So our colleagues, my Japanese hosts, suggested that we should have some very quick 2-minute summaries from some of our attendees of the meeting. So they're organising it, but we've got the challenge. They've got 2 minutes maximum to summarise either an all-day symposium or a 2-hour parallel session. So before we start, can I ask Connie Akiro to come up and quickly talk about what the GYA did on Monday, because one of the most valuable things we did was partner with the GYA in terms of having a workshop on Monday.
Thank you very much, Sir Peter. All right. Akihiro and I have apparently 2 minutes between us to say, 5, good. Just to tell you about what happened on Monday. So again, I'm Connie Shemreiru. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Global Young Academy. And one of our main objectives as an academy is to improve the capacity of young scientists, whether members of the Global Young Academy or not, around the world in engaging with governments in science advice. So we organized a workshop in conjunction with INGSA and the Young Academy of Japan, where about 40 young scientists from all over the world really came along. And the subject was leadership for science advice.
Hello, yeah.
And we had Mark Seiner and Alessandro Allegra in the room, and Kun Vermeer and Akihiro and Yoko together with us. And one of the main things that came out of this workshop for the young scientists was the fact that they are going to be expected to participate in science advice in 4 capacities, either as an expert, as part of a committee, in engagement with the media, and sometimes they may be called upon or forced to just contribute an agenda of their own given their position. And we recognize that it's something that, so this has nothing to do with what I'm saying. This is Akihiro's 1 or 2 minutes, so please attention over here. Just to finish up, to say that one of the things that we recognize is that as young scientists, we know that there's no reward for participating in science advice as far as we can see. We are not going to get promoted. It's going to take a lot of time, but we still have a responsibility to be leaders. And accepting that to participate in the SDGs especially, the problems are really complex and we cannot work as individuals. We must lead collectively. So that means we have to inquire from different perspectives. We must engage. We must connect. We must reflect. We must think about how much time can we give to this and what are the questions we want to deal with. So this workshop was really about looking at the science advice, what we can expect to, how we can expect to engage, but also from a leadership perspective to know that although it's quite risky, you might be misunderstood, you might find yourself in situations you can't manage, but you must be bold and lead together, collectively, not just with scientists, but across, with policymakers, with other policy actors. So that was the main thing that came from it. But Akira still has to say something.
The workshop? Okay, yeah. Thank you. Actually, I'm Akira Kishimura from Young Academy of Japan, and we joined the workshop, and we feel the workshop is a really great opportunity for us, and because the activity itself is really related to our activity. Actually, the workshop, the contents of the workshop is quite new to us, and particularly to find out what is science advice and what is collective leadership. So it's a really good opportunity to us. Here you can see the outline of the Young Academy of Japan's activity. And mainly we usually building the network of young scientists in the domestic context and also international context. And recently we try to lead discussion for the next generation, including societal issues. Also, recently we have focused on the co-creation of new science with citizens. It's a kind of citizen science. But so this kind of activity is really related to the science advices to solve the unsolved issue of the society in the society. Actually, in the beginning of the next year, we are organizing the workshop and symposium with people from the local government to create new science and to find out new research topics. So in that sense, the science advice skill and facilitation skill is really important. So the workshop is a really good experience to us. Also, this INGSA meeting is, we learn a lot of things from this INGSA meeting for this kind of activity. Thank you very much.
Yes, we'll put it on.
Right, would you introduce yourself, explain which session you're representing, make your report, and then we'll move on to Oscar next.
Hello everyone, I am Shalini Arya from Institute of Chemical Technology, Mumbai, India. I was a rapporteur for the session Technological Risk Management, dealing with uncertainties, risks, trade-off and human values. Technological change is inherently risky, uncertain, yet we rely on it to progress societal goals and interests. More often than not, there are trade-offs associated with new technologies. In this session, different strategies to achieve greatest benefits from promising technologies while minimizing the risk were discussed by distinguished panelists. Some of the key things that were shared by the panelists were from their own case studies conducted in their institutions and their countries. The points to be considered when we consider any technology: the budget, on-schedule delivery of the technology, project scale-up, various risks involved in it. Simultaneously, one has to also consider the national security, climate change. Also, it was discussed that the prior assessment of the risk for any emerging technology is needed. Creating protocols, control systems, societal aspects, and ethical aspects are also necessary. Apart from that, privacy, security, privacy is also very important. So it was also quoted by one of the speakers that you are not safe, no one is safe. So when you are considering technology, consider the safety of public safety. Innovations in genome editing, gene therapies, and other forms of genetic manipulation and synthetic biology also have evolved. So gene technology was discussed. It was discussed that one should not ban acceptable innovation only due to fear of unacceptable uses. Further, there is always an added advantage, benefits of flexible governance that allows innovation based on scientific progress. Example, lifting barriers when techniques become safe and socially acceptable. Artificial intelligence, cyber, internet, machine learning concerns the questions whether the technology will deprive the millions of people job or the machines powered by AI. How do we make sure that the decisions they make are safe and also ethical? So hence, as a scientist or engineer or technologist, our approach should be to try and to solve the problem caused by the technology, using the technology. Simultaneously, one should know that the limit of systems or the technology, and there is a need of democratization. So the technology is not only for scientists, technologists or engineers, it should be for all. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Just before I continue to deliver this message, I would like to thank the organizers and our host for the invitation and for the unparalleled hospitality. Thank you very much. My name is Oscar Reyes. I am Science Officer at the Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean of the new form ISC. I had the privilege to be in the session 1.3, which was about big data, transforming policy making. Well, the session was brightly framed in an important set of questions, such as the relationship between SDGs and big data, and how big data can influence policy making. Also, other traditional questions were asked regarding to trust, privacy, governance, and the like. Some of the topics that experts dealt with were related to issues such as machine learning, policy initiatives, research data usage, innovative initiatives, and questions the like. Some of the other points highlighted as challenges were the increasing rapid evolution of data, which poses challenges related to the collection of data, the storage, and our own capability to keep up with such rapid increase. If not dealt with, that could lead to information overload. And then big data also poses new implications at the social, political, economical, and ethical level. Furthermore, some highlights argue that data allows policymakers to make better policies, although to do so, it requires somehow data literacy or data translation between data experts, and policies. In addition to these, discussions regarding technical issues, interpretation, application, and privacy were also discussed. Then it was also mentioned the importance of trust and trustworthiness when dealing with data, and that also in that it could be achieved by building relationship with the people from whom we collect data, and also in the appropriate usage of the data. Finally, some of the questions that arose from the discussions were related to between the concepts of correlation versus causality, the correct usage of big data term, and also some questions related to private and public usage of data, which is increasing now. Final remarks by the speakers were related to the need to work more a little bit in the definition of big data, which is confusing to most, how to be wise on the collection of data and its usage, the need to increase transparency, and the fact that the big data is an open question to further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Alessandro Allegra from University College London, and I'm going to tell you about the session on skills development for evidence brokerage. So the session was a bit unusual in the sense that the chair started by asking the questions to the audience first, before the panel had a chance to do their presentation, with the idea that it will be interesting to know what people were coming in the room with in terms of questions, what they want to know. And the sort of questions that came from the audience regarded how do we do evidence brokerage, how do we get the incentives right, how do we deal with differences between different disciplines, between different cultural contexts, who should be doing the brokerage, should it be the scientists themselves? And these questions were addressed by the panelists in their presentations. We learned about several examples. We learned about training toolkits which have been developed for civil servants in various parts of the world, which have been very successful in developing, among other things, soft skills. We have heard more about the IIIS fellowship scheme to place scientists in various government departments, which many of you may be familiar with, and how this model has been looked at in different parts of the world as well. Some of the challenges of providing evidence brokerage in situations where there is no formal mechanisms, such as in Argentina. We learned about the cultural differences in terms of the role of evidence in policy. So for example, interesting fact that in Japanese, apparently the English word broker has a negative connotation of middleman. So when we speak about evidence brokerage, we should keep those cultural assumptions in a way in mind, especially when we work at the global level as we're doing here today. And also we discussed the different approaches needed for different sorts of challenges, different problems require different approaches. And in terms of the key points, sort of like takeaway points, I think that the key thing is that there's many ways of doing evidence brokerage, and there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Different contexts in terms of countries, in terms of problems, in terms of disciplines will require different approaches. Still, we can learn a lot from what has already been done and what's being done around the world. This has to be done carefully. Another point that came out quite strongly is that not every scientist can necessarily become an evidence broker, nor every scientist should, but there should be resources in place for those that have the skills or the potential and the interest in doing that. There should be a network of support, and those should be plugged in both into the research community and in the policy community. And finally, these things take time and take money. So there is a cost involved. A lot was discussed, how do we decide what to do and whether it's worth it, and there's trade-offs sometimes, but building those networks and skills for evidence brokerage takes time and resources, not something that's going to happen by itself. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Faratika Ismail. I'm the Regional Program Officer for INGSA Asia Chapter. We are based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So I've been tasked to be a rapporteur for parallel sessions 4.3, Local is Global, Intersections of Science Advice and Science Diplomacy. So there are a few key points here from the stations. For the first one, diplomacy is the process and the policy is the output for the process. And there are 3 actions for science diplomacy. First one is actions for national needs, actions for cross-border interests, actions for global interests. And for a good science diplomacy, it starts with a strong political leadership. And science diplomacy is beyond individual institutions. It's not one person job. So, and we should continuously feeding the gap between scientific community and diplomatic community. So, also, the one point that very important is scientists need to change way of engaging with policymakers, tailor the message to whom you are addressing. That's what I see. And one interesting point and remarks from one of the panelists said that we should invest more into building a relationship between science and religion, which have not been discovered yet. So for the conclusions, there is no one-size-fits-for-all countries solution for science diplomacy. Thank you.
From the Gauteng City Region Observatory, we had a speaker from the JRC, Knowledge Center for Territorial Policies, World Resources Institute from China, University of Tokyo, and then the University College of London. All in all, they all agree that problems of urbanization are very rife, and science advice is important in trying to provide solutions to that. It was agreed that 2/3 of the population of the world is living in the urban areas, but they are fraught with a lot of problems, and science advice needs to come in to solve it. At the end of the day, it was felt that the smartness of cities can be read through deliberate approach to prompt to prompt and harvest the urban dividend, systematic knowledge systems geared towards spatial analysis and differentiation, generation shared insights into complex questions. The question was asked whether the cities in the global south by 2030 can achieve this target of 1.05 carbon emission. And the answer was no. And the reason is that cities are not aware of their roles, and also because there's lack of science advice. The idea was also pushed that then science advice should help to understand and address local challenges. It should provide local and national reporting. It should give global reporting and benchmarking, or it should do local reporting and benchmarking activities. It should provide foresight and horizon scanning And last but not the least, it should be inspirational and creative. Thank you.
My name is Annamarie Aliev. I'm an international development student from the University of Ottawa, but currently working with Elsevier here in Japan. So I was reporting on session 3.3, Structural Considerations for Science Advice and Public Policy. So just a few key takeaways from that discussion. The first is that it's really important to make several considerations when trying to establish a science advisory mechanism in an organization. And just as one example, the degree of scientific literacy within the organization. The European Commission, just to illustrate, employs just as many scientists as lawyers, so it would be a pretty safe bet that any scientific advice they receive would be well understood and well received. Secondly, there's an importance of being resourceful in providing science advice, particularly for small or developing countries who may not have all the resources to do what a bigger country can do. And this could be done simply by pointing policymakers to the existing reports on topics of relevance. As Mark Ferguson, the Chief Scientific Advisor of Ireland, put it, the world is already awash with reports that nobody reads. So it's perfectly acceptable to leverage the existing international output out there. Thirdly, the importance of having a deep level of trust between science advisors and policymakers, because politicians need to feel comfortable enough having an informal discussion on a topic they don't know anything about. And equally, it's important for a science advisor to be able to admit when they don't have the answer. And sometimes the best that they can give as an immediate response is an opinion. So it's really important to make that distinction between an opinion and advice. And while there are many or a huge amount of reports out there, we saw that there is a challenge in creating this policy relevant accessible knowledge because it's not always well incentivized, whether through rewards or funding. And some of the work that the Royal Society, for example, in the UK is doing is trying to create a stronger market for both that formal and informal evidence synthesis by addressing some of the barriers there. Then while there was a general consensus in the room that science advice functions better when it is institutionalized, sometimes ad hoc approaches may need to be used and can still be effective, especially in developing countries who are still in the process of establishing a formal science advisory system. Therefore, having some flexibility is also crucial. And just some final points. It's important to acknowledge that science advice is still a relatively new role, but it could certainly be the emergence of a new profession going forward. We're seeing, for example, there's a trend of creating separate public policy units on university campuses that could help researchers identify where their research could potentially have an impact on policy. And this in turn is actually fueling a growing desire to establish closer academia-government relations. And on a final note, with regard to how to measure the impact of science advice, one could say that there is an impact simply if the advice was considered, because the truth is it's very difficult to attribute one piece of advice to a certain policy decision or outcome. So there is nevertheless some value in embracing that ambiguity, and assuming that having had the demand for the scientific advice in the first place is a good measure in itself. Thank you.
Hello, my name is George Asama, PhD researcher at the University of Sheffield, and I'm reporting on the role of the private sector in advancing the SDGs. So when we started the session, Royston made a statement that the main reason why the Millennium Development Goals were not mentioned throughout the 36-hour session that we've had so far is its failure to admit the private sector and its implementation. So we all agreed to the fact that the private sector, including the businesses, is a necessary evil in the sense that it's a major contributor and also is a major contributor to the problem and also to the as a solution. So we agreed that in this millennium, where 86% of millennials believe that organizational successes only does not only depends on profits, but also its impact. Most businesses are shifting their focuses from profit orientation to also how to impact the communities. So new business models which has been advanced, which Royston use the acronym INGSA. The I represents impact investing. So almost every business right now is investing on technologies that really impact on the societies. The N represents no one left behind, which means that whenever businesses are investing, they make sure that they are investing in models or in products that really impact the society. Also, businesses are involved in governance and policy change, which means that they make sure that governments invest in products which are efficient and also beneficial to the taxpayers. And also, they are bringing on board systematic change. For instance, investment in electric cars, making sure that emission rates are reduced drastically. And the last one, which is authenticity and measurable, making sure that trade-offs and signages are well measured. So, in a nutshell, we concluded that none of the SDGs can be achieved without corporate action. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Meera Basu, working as a senior researcher at Uzbekistan-Japan Innovation Center of Youth, and also I am a member of Global Young Academy. Today morning I was in session 2.2 that mainly focused on mapping critical policy nodes, where the panelists shared their extended expertise and experience in priority setting in complex policy environment, and discussed how scientific and technical knowledge can be mobilized in explicating the options and ranking the issues and responses. Most specifically, importance of prioritizing SDGs on national level first, for example, setting up country-based pilots by developing national strategies and useful indicators, and then interacting internationally on SDG targets. The importance of bridging SDGs, STI, and policy by developing policy timeline, action mapping, and systematic mapping of interlinkage. Importance of education, science, and scientific capacities, and consolidating the STI capacities and global monitoring of STI, and importance of setting policy priority to implementation and monitoring the implementation, and interlinkaging the SDGs by survey, mapping, meta-analysis, synergy, and trend-off, and mapping new policies. Finally, importance of civil society involvement, particularly the role of social scientists on achieving the SDGs and giving the important opportunity to local governments and communities were highlighted in this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to turn to James Willesden when he stops texting or whatever he's doing. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone. Before I leave this platform, I just wanted to say few words. I came here for the first time attending the Science Leadership Program for Young Scientists. It was on 5th. So I would like to just say that it was very wonderful. Giving INGSA organized that program particularly for young people like us. So giving that kind of training at this very young age has really started, our brains have started really working towards that direction. So thank you very much for that training program, and thank you very much to INGSA for all hospitality and all care. It's been great being here and wonderful. So on behalf of all the participants of Science Leadership Program and Science Advisory, I would like to thank everyone. Thank you so much.
We'll just deal with the usual technical problem of getting to the right slide set. But while I do, James Willesden is Vice Chair of INGSA, and he's responsible for all the knowledge activities, what we call the Knowledge Centre of INGSA. And now we have the technical solution solved, so over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. So yes, it just falls to me to give a quick overview of the activities that INGSA is both engaged in and planning in and around research and the development of new or distilled knowledge in this arena. As many of you will recall, if you've been to other INGSA meetings, we, from the very outset, when we were setting up the network back in 2014, we were always very keen that there should be a strong role within the network for those who study and think about, theorize, do empirical work on evidence policy, systems and interactions of various kinds, and on the politics and practice of scientific advice. And you see a few examples up here. It's great that David Goff is here with us, one of the authors of that very good blue report, The Science of Using Science. We've got, of course, Roger Pilkey here with us, who spoke very well at the first INGSA conference in 2014, so it's great to have Roger back. Sheila Jasanoff is another person who's been very influential in this space, and there's a lovely piece she wrote for a little book we did on this, where she talks at the end about the need for science advisors to leave themselves open to the critical scrutiny and gaze of those who are scholars of the science of scientific advice, that no one, even science advisors, should be above that critical gaze. So there's been a tradition through INGSA, and it's great. It's something we're very keen to maintain and continue to champion. As a social scientist who works on these things, I've also seen it as partly my role in the INGSA team to keep pushing that side of what we do forwards. We have, as Peter says, a little knowledge hub. It's very small. Me and my colleague Jasper Montana, who's here with us, and of course George, who Asama, who just acted as rapporteur there, is also now working with us in Sheffield. Sheffield, of course, famous as a steel city, but now famous for the new Doctor Who. I don't know how widely viewed Doctor Who is here in Japan, but the new Doctor, the first woman Doctor, is the series of Doctor Who at the moment is based in Sheffield. So we suddenly have a whole new sideline in Sheffield as a centre of intergalactic time travel. But we also are home to the INGSA Knowledge Hub. So, to get to what we're doing, we have been active in various areas. This is a summary of the things we have been doing. We have been working with the IDRC, and Matt Wallace spoke about this in the opening plenary yesterday. The fantastic group of inaugural INGSA IDRC research associates. We have a Palgrave Collections Palgrave Communications thematic collection, case studies, a manifesto. I'm going to go through these with a slide on each, so let me just whip quickly through. The research associates, of course, yes, Matt spoke about them yesterday. We're delighted to have them all with us here at the meeting the past 2 days. And tomorrow we have a focused workshop with the 6 2018 associates. You can see them listed there, working on all sorts of fascinating issues. I won't go through them all. Water governance in Moroccan agriculture, sea level rise through coastal zone management, evidence and household energy policy making in Nigeria, the role of research centres in the generation and promotion of knowledge for the SDGs in Bolivia, scientific advice on drug supply control and demand reduction in Sri Lanka. Really interesting set of topics. We've got the call out, of course, as we were reminded yesterday, for the next round. And our role has been to try and work with that group, and which we'll be doing tomorrow more intensively, to make the most of these projects. The collection that's been running now for a couple of years through the journal Palgrave Communications. This is one of the big open access platform journals that now exists. The call for papers for that collection remains open. We've been delighted by the quality, breadth, and geographic diversity, as well as disciplinary diversity of the papers that have been submitted to that collection. And I would urge any of you who are in the game of researching and writing about this stuff, who haven't yet contributed a paper, please do have a think about that. There's some information out on the table outside about the Palgrave Communications collection. All of those papers are open access, and we think that arena is a particularly good one for papers on this topic, because clearly a lot of practitioners as well as academics are going to be interested in this stuff. We continue to produce a lot of case studies and other training materials. You'll be aware, many of you, I'm sure, that there's a great a range of stuff under the resources tab on the INGSA website, which includes a really diverse range of case studies that have been developed by the team in Auckland, by others around the INGSA network. They are a great teaching resource as much as anything else, as well as something we use for training. I used one just last week with a group of PhD students in Sheffield as a way of surfacing the dilemmas, tensions, trade-offs, and opportunities at these different evidence policy interfaces. So we continue to be interested in those. Those who have been in touch with us over the last year or 2 years now will be aware of this process, the Inks A Manifesto for 2030. There's been a lot of discussion, of course, today and yesterday about the Sustainable Development Goals. This project is now nearing its completion. We issued a draft document at the end of last year, and then there was a consultation period of a few months. We've had some fantastic responses to that, thanks to anyone in the room who contributed. I know several here did. And we've been now going through a process of assimilating and making sense of that in the context, of course, of an SDG debate that is itself evolving and changing. We will be producing the final version of the INGSA Manifesto to coincide with the next UN STI forum, the Multi-Stakeholder Forum on Science, Technology and Innovation for the SDGs, which is scheduled for the 14th, 15th of May next year. And that we're hoping that final document will be co-authored by all of the different INGSA regional chapters, as well as by some of the other core players in the network. And particular thanks to Mark Sana, who's been a huge contributor to that process, and also Dan Sarovitz. So those are things that are going on, and then things that are coming up. This is a new one that we're announcing today. So this is the first airing of this. We have just launched live on the website a little survey, an evidence and policy survey. So I would love it if you could all go to that page that's on the INGSA site and click through to the SurveyMonkey survey that's there. It's a very short survey. It won't take more than 6 or 7 minutes. We are trying through that to get a better handle on you, the network, and the bigger INGSA network that's not in this room, in terms of the different perspectives, the different traditions, if you like, in evidence policy, scientific advice that people are drawing on in their work, and in that way we can better understand the complexion of the INGSA network and the ways in which we can meet your needs and deliver the right kind of material to you. There's also a research element to this. We're keen to just understand the landscape and how people locate themselves within it, in that there are a range of different starting points from where people enter scientific advice or evidence-informed policymaking. So if you have time, please go and do that and pass it on to your friends who are engaged in these debates. Not general, well, anyone can fill it in, to be fair, but we'd prefer it if it was filled in by people who are in some sense involved in this stuff. Otherwise, the results will be a bit skewed. And then finally, Ernesto gave a slight heads up to this in a session earlier today. This is something that we are launching as a process in 2019 with the aim of bringing it back to the next big INGSA meeting, which will be in November 2020, so 2 years from now. This is a partnership that we've developed with our friends at UNESCO to produce a better map, a better atlas of the different institutional models and arrangements that different national systems have developed to strengthen these kind of interfaces, whether they're calling it scientific advice or evidence-based policy, evidence-informed policy. There's a whole range of structures out there. As ever with INGSA, we're not advocating for any one or other structure, but we are interested in the range of different models and approaches that countries are adopting and how that mix is changing. And UNESCO, as many of you will know, has for now quite a number of years collated this kind of data with respect to policies for science, technology and innovation, understanding the different STI systems and funding streams, etc., that countries have in place. And this has been published every 5 years through the UNESCO Science Report, which certainly, since I've been involved in this debate, every 5 years seems to sort of double in size. It's now, you need a small wheelbarrow to carry the 2015 edition around. But we will be contributing to the 2020 version with more information, not on the policy for science side, but on the science for policy side. So more on this soon, and we'll be sending out more details as this gets fully underway. But the aim will be for this to be a product of this network. We have, across INGSA, very good coverage of a whole range of countries, and we want you to try and help us fill it in. So more on that shortly. And then my final parting question, in terms of where we go with the research and knowledge elements of INGSA as a network, we are interested, and I'm just going to ask now for a quick show of hands, those in the room who would be keen for there to be, alongside the main INGSA meeting in 2020, at least one day of a more academic nature, where we bring together the researchers who are working on these issues and try and exchange some of the latest ideas and theories. Yeah, so it would be more of a normal academic conference with abstracts, posters, etc. If you would be interested in that, you can wave now. Oh, that's good. Well, that's certainly enough to make it worth. But more seriously, if you are really interested, if we were to do this, we would want to assemble a proper program committee and think it all through. Please, if you are interested, drop me an email or give me a direct message on Twitter. The addresses are there, and just let us know if you'd be up for that, because we'd really love to assemble out of the people who are here and possibly others in the network a core group who would like to invest time and energy in both maintaining and developing the researcher sub-community within INGSA as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, James. We're now going to have Yusuf Al-Baluchi. Yusuf, where are you? Yusuf is Deputy Chair of the newly formed Science International Relations Division of INGSA and chairs FIMSTAN. He'll explain this in a minute. And we had a one-day meeting on Monday, and he's about to announce, I think, the next meeting and some of the associated activities. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much, everybody. Next, the way forward. All roads lead to Oman. So Muscat, Sultanate of Oman, in February 11th to 13th will be the next meeting with INGSA. It's as the main question just actually been raised by INGSA just a while is having a conference alongside the INGSA activities. So this is the idea of having actually the Ocean Economy and Future Technology Conference is the main thing, but we need actually to protect all the discussion and the outcomes, desired outcomes, is to be protected by INGSA Science Advice and also Science Diplomacy Advice as well. So this international forum of science and technology diplomacy, the main activity will be the Ocean Economy Conference. This includes the exhibition and also a discussion from the Triple Helix, as you know, from people from academia, from industry and government, sit together and discuss 5 main themes, including logistics and transportation, fisheries and aquaculture, mining, which is undersea mining, energy, and the most important thing is the sustainability. Alongside, we are going to have FAMISTAN meeting, the Foreign Ministers Science and Technology Advisors Network, and the discussion will be mainly focused on the SDG number 14, and also a discussion on issues related to science and technology diplomacy in general, the mechanism, and way forward as well. On the other side, with Sir Peter and INGSA help, actually we are going to conduct science policy interface workshop that will be run by INGSA in Oman. This will include actually people 50% from science side and the others, the 50% will be from the government and policy making side. As His Excellency, the Minister of Education in Rwanda actually highly appreciate his point, is the leadership is the most important on advancing science and advancing policy as well. So leadership is also being considered to take a high-level workshop on ocean economy. This will be run by scientific advices and evidences. And also with the call from Sir Peter as well and the ISC board, we are going to conduct and having actually a host the International Science Council board meeting in Muscat alongside all together. This actually been announced last month in the website. You can get more information about the conference and also the social media accounts, and the hashtag is actually mentioned in Twitter and in LinkedIn. What's the desired outcomes? We actually focus on outcomes oriented, so mainly we need to know what's the future skills that's related to ocean economy, what's the business and investments going to be a platform in Muscat, and also science and innovation. The main thing we are working within the INGSA process and science, FAMISTAN science diplomacy, is having strategic and policy making. Thank you very much.
The other topic that we're going to discuss at that meeting, which may interest some of you in particular at the science diplomacy meeting, and we're having a joint meeting with CoData, is to discuss the issues of data diplomacy, how data and diplomacy are going to interact. So some of you may be particularly interested in that. If I let myself or Paul Berkman know, we'll make sure that you know more details. I'd now like to ask Daya Reddy, who's the president of the newly formed International Science Council, who's rushing to an aeroplane to make a few comments.
Thank you very much, Peter. Particularly for this opportunity to say a little more about the International Science Council. We've heard over the last 2 days that INGSA operates under the auspices of the Council, but there hasn't been an opportunity to say too much about what the Council is all about. Well, in brief, it's a global voice whose objective, broadly speaking, is that of advancing science as a global public good. So that's quite a mission. Who or what is the Council? Well, it's the product of a merger between ICSU, the International Council for Science, and the International Social Science Council, a merger which took place last July. And with that merger, it's the largest non-governmental science organization. And I say that because its membership includes academies, science councils, other such bodies from 140 countries. You'll see, you'll have an idea of the membership from this slide. Together with 40 scientific unions across the natural and social sciences, of course, and then some 16 interdisciplinary bodies, major programs which have been brought forward from the two predecessor organizations. So from the slide here, you'll see that we, from the point of view of wanting to be inclusive, we have some work to do in bringing more African countries on board. To some extent, the same applies to Latin America and Asia. This slide gives you a rough idea. It's a collage of just a few of the member organizations, and as you can see from it, a mix of academies of science or social sciences, scientific unions, unions from bodies as diverse as disciplines as diverse as sociology, psychology, and the like. So, well, that's it, but well, what does the council do? The board has been very busy since early July, working towards putting in place a plan of action. So we have, and we had, as of July, a fairly high-level strategic plan, which required much more detail to be translated into an implementation plan, a plan of action. And what has emerged from our discussions is a set of 5 core areas of action in which we hope to plan, in fact, to devote our attention over the next, certainly over the next 3 years until the next General Assembly. So I'd like to take you very quickly through these. The first has to do with our role in what one might broadly refer to as policy for science, challenges in the evolving system of science, science as an open, collaborative enterprise, something that we plan to promote very strongly. Also, you know, we've had a lot of talk, very rightly, about inter and transdisciplinary work, but inter and transdisciplinary work and activities rely on strong disciplinary foundations, and we do see a role for the council there in promoting fundamental inquiry as well. The whole business of research incentives and recognition, and likewise problems that I think many here will be aware of in relation to the ways in which research is assessed, the uses, perhaps misuses of metrics and the like. So we'd certainly like to play a role there in ensuring that our researchers are assessed, evaluated according to clear, objective, rational criteria. Diversity in science, meaning inclusivity, geographical, with regard to different parts of the world, certainly with regard to gender and the like. And of course, the very important area of funding for international scientific collaboration. The second is science for policy, public action. I'll say very little about this because this really has to do with the activities of INGSA and the council more broadly, and the need for us to be bringing about a closer integration between the activities of INGSA as it resides within the council. The third major area is that of inter and transdisciplinary activities across national boundaries as well. So here the focus would be on actionable knowledge, and let's bear in mind that the council is not a research organization. It acts as a catalyst, as a mobilizer of the scientific community, with a view to producing actionable knowledge through various international initiatives, programs, networks, and not least of all, partnerships. The freedom of science, freedom and responsibility of science, I should say, is a core part of our objectives, and you don't have to read it, but I've reproduced there an article, Article 7, from the statutes of the Council, which sets out our responsibilities with regard to responsibility in science, promoting freedom of movement, association, the ability of scientists to have access to data, information, other resources, and not to have to encounter resistance, oppression, and the like in the course of going about their scientific duties. Likewise, there is the objective of establishing principles for responsible conduct in science and promoting ethical and responsible conduct in science. We have, certainly in the media for some years now, there have been many, many reports around problems regarding reproducibility, not to mention fraud, fabrication, and the like. And here we have a role in particular pertaining to graduate students and emerging scientists. And then the final area would be that of managing key relationships. If we are to be the global voice for science, we have to be credible, we have to establish solid relationships with major bodies like the United Nations and its various agencies, the G7, G20 countries, various other regional organizations across the different continents. I've spoken earlier about the need to ensure inclusivity in the strongest sense with regard to parts of Africa, but also small island development states, to take another example. And then let's not forget the scientific community, individual scientists. So depending on how one wants to count, there are perhaps between 5 and 7 million working scientists around the world, most of whom don't know about us, so we have to do something about that since we purport to represent them. And then last but not least are our relationships, partnerships, for example, with the Inter-Academy Partnership, which is a network, a global network of academies of science, with which the predecessor organizations have had a good relationship, and that, again, is being carried forward. So that's where we are. And just a final note to do with where we go from here. Just today, we've sent out a communique to our members, giving some idea of what we refer to as 4 global challenge domains in which we plan to, within which we plan to go about the various activities as set out in these 5 core areas. And briefly, they are, well, not surprisingly, Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, the digital revolution, its opportunities, the threats as well, science in policy and public discourse, public engagement, and then finally, changing systems of science. So that is what we plan to do, and watch this space. Thank you.
And just to say, that document that Di has just referred to will be distributed to everybody on the INGSA mailing list next week. So it will be available to you. I'd now like to call on, we're nearly at the end, Remy. Where's Remy?
So we'll be brief. Just to announce, the next meeting will be held in Montreal, 2 years' time, almost to the day. November, we have 2 to 4th, most likely will be a bit longer than that, 2 to 5th or 6th. Organizer with INGSA, of course, as the key body. Mon Annamarie, Chief Scientist of Canada, and myself. Will be also a joint conference with the Canada Science Policy Centre. Their meeting is starting in few minutes from now. It's 5 o'clock in the morning in Ottawa, couple of hours, they will do the same announcement saying that in 2020 we'll have a joint meeting. Detail, of course, will come. It's early days. Well, the meeting will be held at the Palais des Congrès de Montréal, right downtown Montreal. And with, maybe thanks to climate change, it will not be too cold, even if it's November. Some of the reason to have the meeting in Montreal, a lot of international meeting, a lot of international event in Montreal all the time. Number one, host city in America for international meeting. Safe and affordable city, accessible many parts of the world. We even have a direct flight now between Tokyo and Montreal. No excuse for the colleague from Japan not to join us. So I tried to see if I could start that. I don't know what I touched here. Can you just help me to start that? This is a short video. Oh, this. So no excuse not to join us. You are all invited to come to Montreal in November 2020. And of course, as I said, it's early days. So with Peter, the colleague at INGSA, Mona Nimer office in Ottawa, ourselves in Montreal and Quebec City, and of course a colleague from CSPC, we are open to your suggestion, to any comments you want to make to us. And of course, the new generation, the young generation, will certainly be most welcome. It's critically important to continue to involve you in INGSA and the biennial meeting of INGSA. Thank you very much.
We're coming to the end. I've made a decision. You're not going to hear a boring closing address from me. So I could ask Professor Kishi to make some comments, and then I'm going to make just report finally on some other activities of INGSA, and then we'll be closed, I promise you, by 5:30.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, after closing address of Sir Peter Krugman, I will give final remarks as a chairman of Japanese organization committee of this INGSA 2018. Okay, I hope all of you have enjoyed this 2 days special conference. I myself am really glad to have such a wonderful time with you together here. Okay, as you have already realized, many young researchers and students have worked so hard to organize this conference. Please stand up, young scientists, yeah? Thank you very much, and please join me to give them a big hand, big hand. As a volunteer, they worked very hard. Okay, thank you very much. I also thank all organizers and sponsors in Japan. Last but not least, Sir Peter Krugman. Thank you for always considerable contribution to INGSA. Thank you very much. I look forward to next INGSA conference in Quebec. Okay, best wishes for our future success. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Kishi. I had prepared a long address trying to summarize some key points come out of it. I had actually, but you're not going to hear it because we're tired. I think we've had a really fantastic meeting. It gives me a chance to save a talk for another day on some of the issues which I think are still outstanding, and then you can hear me at more length later. But I do, before you leave, just want to say a little bit more about where INGSA is going, and also point out that we actually, although the conference finishes today, there are 2 satellite meetings tomorrow, one on parliamentary advice, which is rather full, but I'm sure if you talk to Grant, you can talk your way in. He takes bribes rather nicely. And also one on, which I think is turning out to be a very important topic, and those of you who are still here, to come back to this workshop on advice in the urban context. I mean, given what we heard today, I think that's very important. This slide just summarizes the work program that we've been undertaking. 4,000 members in over 80 countries, regional chapters in 3 continents well established, and this week we've established coordinating committees to establish activities in North America and Europe. As I said before earlier, we've got the International Relations and Diplomacy Division established, which also supports the Foreign Minister Network. We also are thinking about whether there's room for a network of people interested in parliamentary aspects of advice per se, and particularly seeing how tomorrow goes, where there's desire for a division that's focused on subnational activities, urban advice, etc. We also support, might sound strange, the British Commonwealth Science Advice Network in partnership with the Royal Society of London, which is actually an experimental effort to see whether developing an information exchange, which is available for North-South information, all those reports that Mark Ferguson talked about earlier on, so they're more accessible to countries in the global South. James talked about the Knowledge Centre, and we do many other things, including the quarterly network. But most of our activity it's been not at these major meetings, but it's about workshops. And since Brussels, our last meeting, we've conducted about 20 workshops. Some of them are more general regional capacity building, not just for young scientists, but also for senior scientists, young policymakers and senior policymakers. And then working with a number of partners, we've had a large number of thematic workshops ranging from upskilling academies to working with the JRC on migration and demography issues in Europe, well-being in the digital age, a meeting in Santiago on parliamentary advice, in Berlin on assessment, Copenhagen on social science, and so forth. And you'll see that we're already committed into next year and the year after in a large number of workshops, both in capacity building and in more technical issues, as you see below. And we do other things, obviously, in the major international meetings like AAAS, ESOF, and so forth. There's been a shift in activity to more and more report writing. And we've just published a major report on the understanding well-being in the context of rapid digital and associated transformations, which was a work program that took over a year to complete and was initiated at the request of the OECD and is available on the INGSA website, and which will be the basis of a lot more work going ahead. We have, as James's report mentioned already, a report underway on science advice principles in relationship to the SDGs. And Anne Barsley, who's here, is leading a working group on the issue of the conduct of scientists in transnational emergencies, which appears to be a void in ethical guidelines and where a number of issues have been identified. We're also considering whether to think more about the role of private sector-derived evidence in public policy development and the opportunities and the issues around it. We're supported by several bodies. You'll notice we're not a membership organisation. We do not charge fees. We do not charge registration to come to this meeting for the reasons that we want to make it fully accessible to lower middle income countries as well. And we rely on a lot of report, but I particularly want to acknowledge the Wellcome Trust and the International Science Council itself and IDRC and for all they've done for us, and the many countries such as the government of Rwanda who've been partnered with us on activities there. The Joint Research Centre and ourselves, UNESCO and ourselves, do a lot of activities together. We try to coordinate and where possible collaborate. And we do all of this basically off a very minimal secretariat. And I particularly want to acknowledge Lara and Grant, who are the secretariat in Auckland. Stand up. And Jasper, wherever Jasper is, who actually keep this thing going. When you think of all the activity we're doing on a shoestring, it's really quite remarkable. We're governed through, we have an executive group of officers that are appointed by the International Science Council, and we have regional officers, as you've heard about. And the formation of the ISC, as Radai has already reported, will have a number of implications for us, all of which I regard as positive. We've agreed to jointly examine the nature of what a closer relationship means by next June. It will clearly have implications for the balance of strategy activities and, from my point of view, particularly fundraising and philanthropy and the regional relationships. Di has already talked about this, so I won't dwell on it, but from the document which was released today by ISC, you'll see that there's a direct mention in the 5 core areas of activity of the essential role of INGSA in that activity. And with that, you see, I did really have a whole talk, but you're not going to hear it because you're tired, I'm tired, and the last thing you want to hear anymore is about evidence-informed policy, et cetera, et cetera. But what I do want to do is thank a lot of people. And first of all, I want to thank the sponsors. You know, the reality is, as I've just said, when you run an organisation entirely on on this basis, we rely on the donors that support the core activities, as I said, the Wellcome Trust, IDRC, the Royal Society, and so forth, and the many partners. And when we run a specific activity like this, we rely on the many sponsors who are listed on the back of your panel, and I'd like you to truly acknowledge their support. Thank you very much. There are three people who've worked really hard to make this happen. Kazu, where are you, Kazu? Stand up. Lara and Grant, you can stand up again. And then Tateo Aramoto and Satoru Ataki. Professor Kishi and his colleagues have been fantastic. And I'm really grateful to all of you, of all of them. But the people I'm most grateful to, all the people are here. Because this is, as I said, not a conference where we pay for speakers to come, where people have come on their own account by and large. We've had to support, and we've found money to support people from low and middle income countries to be here. But by and large, most of you have come here on your own account. And that shows a real commitment to this particular set of issues. And for that, I'm very, very, very grateful. So thank you to all of you. And if I could summarize the meeting now by going to my 36 slides, what I would say is that if you look across the 4 years since INGSA was started, the thinking about this interface has grown and grown and grown. The quality of the discourse is getting both deeper and more fundamental at the real issues on the supply side, the demand side, the brokerage side, the multiple dimensions of what does it mean, who are the audiences from the public right through different constituencies to government at different levels. And I think if we're honest, we've seen a maturing of a quality of presentation and discourse which is increasingly valuable to all of us who think in this space. And to that, I'm really grateful to all those who engage either in the practice or the thinking about this interface. It is hard, it's going to remain hard, there are challenges and there are opportunities. We may see the challenges as very difficult, but the opportunities are worth, and what comes from addressing the issue of how evidence can help global sustainability, population, quality of life and so forth is just so important. So thank you all very much who've prepared and engaged in the discussions. And with that, have a good trip home if you're not going to come to the workshops tomorrow morning, but I hope you do. Thank you very much.